when you evaluate players, when you evaluate wide receivers, it's a pretty technical position. Like you have guys like Devontae Smith
Yeah.
who win a lot differently than Jamar Chase, right? They can both be successful, but in different ways. So when you look at like rookie wide receivers, are there like specific things that you look at to see if that'll
Yeah.
translate
So
well into the
I
NFL?
mentioned something similar to this when I was talking about the quarterbacks, but specifically at wide receiver, I want to see where do you win? Like where are you going to consistently be able to win at the next level? Is it elite speed? Is it, being able to your leaping ability and be able to high point the football, strong hands, breaking tackles in the open field? Like how do you win? And you need to have, similar to quarterback, you need to have multiple areas where you can win, because if you only have one, chances are defenses are going to be able to figure that out. So you need to have multiple areas where you can win. But you're right. Wide receiver is a very technical position. And even, from guys that traditionally play the X to guys that traditionally play the Z, that traditionally come out of the slot, like there are some nuances that are a little bit different on how they play the game. And then you're also looking at how are they versus man coverage, how are they versus zone coverage, guys pressing them. Like there's all of these different variables. And then, you're looking at, okay, their steps off the line. How do they come out of the line? How do they do out of their breaks? How many steps are they taking out of their breaks? How quick, like there is a lot that goes into it. And honestly, it can be a little overwhelming at times because you have to go through it with a fine tooth comb and watch the same play over and over and over and over. And so it can be an exhaustive process at times, just because of all of the different nuances that you're looking for. Now, there are times where you can just see like, all right, that is just stupid fast. Like, I don't need to spend 10 hours to evaluate that he's just stupid fast. So there are things that sometimes make that a little bit easier. But yeah, it's tough too, because if you haven't had the luxury of playing, organized football and watching tape, or having someone teach you how to like go through the process of watching tape, it can be a little overwhelming. We do have a show. I haven't been on the past few episodes just because life's been a little crazy, but Felix Sharp stepped in and done a fantastic job. But we call it Film Nerds, and basically you can go on there and we break down plays and we tell you like what we're seeing, why this is concerning or why it's not concerning, why this play that looked like it wasn't successful actually showed us some really good things about this player, or sometimes vice versa. So, and I know that we've had people talk to us about how, it's helpful so that way they can understand some of the lingo and some of the jargon and stuff like that, because there are so many words that just get thrown out there. And half the time, I'm not sure people always even know what they mean when they say it, but they just throw it out there anyway because it sounds smart. So it's kind of helpful to be able to break down some of that stuff. But yeah, wide receiver is tough.
Do you feel like there's like a prototype of wide receiver that you see success from more often than others? Like maybe it's the alpha wide receiver like Jamar Chase or something like that?
The biggest thing that I would say is separators, guys that are able to separate and beat their man. Now, not everyone does it necessarily the same way, but typically it's because of one of two things. One, it's because, or actually, I would say one of two things. One, it's because of, I mentioned before, speed. They're really fast. They're able to get in and out of their breaks quickly. But most often, I would say 8 times out of 10, the reason they're good separators is because they're very technically sound and they're really good route runners, and they're able to get open because of that. And so I would say finding guys that are able to separate on a consistent basis. We used to have the old school model of get yourself a wide receiver that's 6'3", make sure that they can just body post up their man and throw up the ball to him. The game's changing. And that's why guys like Tyreek Hill are so successful. One, because he's stupid fast, but he's also learned to become a very good wide receiver over the years. And, Stephon Diggs isn't actually the fastest player out there, but he is such a good route runner that he creates separation through that. So you see it done different ways, but that's usually the biggest indicator. And that's why guys like, even though I loved him and it broke my heart, guys like JJ Arcega-Whiteside can't be successful in this type of football today, because corners are getting bigger and more physical than they've ever been before too. And quarterbacks usually aren't just willing to just chuck it up unless it's a guy that they truly trust. So there's a few of those guys, but they're becoming fewer and farther between.
I want to dig a little bit into this idea of like separation for wide receivers, because I think there is like a traditional idea of what wide receiver separation should look like. Hey, I run a post route, and I just have like steps, 4 steps on my defender. I'm wide open. You can chuck it to me. Um, but I figure that separation can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. If I'm running a slant route, or if I'm running, a dig, or if I'm running a post, like separation can look different in all of those different components. Could you kind of walk us through how you look at separation for
Yeah.
different types of receivers, different routes that they run, different functions in the offense, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. They're depending on the type of route, where they're lined up on the field, the separation is going to look a little bit different. So a slant route is usually just quick and in. That's traditionally it's 3 steps, but we're seeing guys go right off the line now. So it varies depending on the offense. It's usually 3 steps, and then you're angling in. But for that, you more or less just want to have the guy in your hip. You don't have to have 3-4 yards of separation in order to be open. You just need to have the guy on your hip. But the tricky part is that's when we're talking man concepts. Often there's a lot of teams, especially if you're running from the slot, that the guys on the inside are running some sort of zone scheme. And so you can see the smarter receivers are able to find those dead spots in the defense and figure out real quickly if it's man or if it's zone. And by that, there are times where they'll actually decelerate to find a hole in the defense, as opposed to just, I'm just going to keep running as fast as I humanly possibly can. There's times where they'll decelerate so that hole is open. So that's where it gets real tricky, is depending on the type of coverage from the defense and where you're lined up. Another great example is on like seam routes, specifically on the outside. Traditionally, they're going to have a corner manning up on them. And what you're going to see is you'll see some receivers that are really fast, but what they do is they don't do a good job of stacking their defender. When I say stacking their defender, is basically what you want to do is, as you're running down the field, you want to replace where they should be. So if you can get in front of them and then have them directly behind you, as opposed to inside of you or outside of you, you have them in the trail position. That way they have nothing to do. Either the only things they can do is either let you catch the ball or attempt to run through you and cause pass interference. So guys that can stack their defenders very well tend to be open, even if their guys right on them, if they're behind them, as opposed to next to them or on the other side of them, depending on what side they're on. That's where they have separation. They're open on that, even though the guy's right behind them. So each route does look a little bit different as to what type of separation is needed for that guy to be open.
You'll generally also hear like criticism of Jamar Chase specifically. I'm very sensitive to this. We know this. But we hear a lot of criticism about Jamar Chase that he doesn't get a lot of separation. And I've seen like a lot of Twitter battles, where people are like, hey, you need to get separation to be a successful receiver. And then people will turn around and say, well, there have been other successful, top 5 wide receivers
Sure.
who don't get any separation at all in that traditional sense. Could
Right.
you help break down like what is Jamar Chase good at when it comes to, getting leverage on his defender?
Jamar Chase is a bully. That's the easiest way that I can break it down. No, so Jamar Chase, I think the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction. So I was one of the few. I don't want to say few, because there were definitely other people. I was one of the guys that liked Devonta slightly more than Jamar Chase, and it wasn't a huge gap. I think both are incredibly talented receivers, but I did have Devonta higher. But now the pendulum swung so far where like everybody thinks Chase is terrible and not a good receiver. And there was a reason he was taken top 10. There was a reason that he had such a dynamic sophomore campaign. There's a reason he was the number one receiver on that team with Justin Jefferson and Terrace Marshall there. So he is a very, very good receiver. But he doesn't get as much separation as other receivers do. He's not, and I think we're seeing it with Terrace Marshall and some of the other guys. Like, I'm very suspicious of the 40 times at the LSU Pro Day. Like, I don't know how everybody on their team ran a 4.3. That's pretty wild to me. Because he's not, when you watch his film, he's not a burner. He's fast, but he's not Henry Ruggs. He's not Tyreek Hill. He's not, these Mecole Hardman. He's fast. He's good for the position, but he's not otherworldly. So he can win with the speed, but that's not traditionally how he's going to win. So for him, I do think he is a good route runner. There are times where I saw him take some plays off. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because sometimes the function of the offense actually has some receivers kind of take plays off at times. So I don't know that I can fully hold that against him. But there were some times where you saw him a little bit lollygagging or different things like that. But where he wins is he is incredibly strong at the catch point. Like, if he gets his hands on the ball, he's coming down with the football. You're not going to tip it away. You're not going to rip it away. He's coming down with that football. I think he's very physical. So when you get in those jump ball situations, when you get in the position where corners in press coverage, which is basically the corner is going to be right on him. He's going to stay with him the entire time. He's not giving him that gap right off of the line. He's going to stay there right with him the entire time. He's able to win in press coverage. He hand fights very well, which I think is a very underrated tactic, and you'll see it a lot. And especially slow-mo, it's easier to see. You'll see guys that corners do a lot of times. They'll do arm bars, or sometimes they'll even grab one of the arms. He's very good at ripping through that, using his hands to create separation. So I think he is more in I would say he tends to be more of the old school traditional X than some of the other players, specifically in this class, because we had so many smaller, speedy receivers in this class, like Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, Jalen Waddle. Like, we didn't have a lot of the traditional X receivers. He can be more of that old school X, but I don't want this to come across as he can't separate. He can. He's just maybe not. That's not how he's going to win as often as Jalen Waddle will doing that, or Devonta Smith will doing that.